The message wasn't meant for me. But when I pressed play and heard my son's voice say, "Can't stand that old woman anymore. Once she's gone, we'll live off her money in Paris," my world cracked in two. That was the moment I realized I had to take back control. My name's Lucille Harris, and this is my story. Where are you watching from tonight? Because what you're about to hear, it changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust. It was a Thursday afternoon, one of those slow, golden days when the light falls soft across the kitchen tiles. I'd been kneading dough for the sweet rolls Ethan used to love as a boy. The radio hummed an old Patsy Cline song, and my phone buzzed on the counter. Ethan, my only son, my heartbeat since the day he was born. I smiled before even checking what it was. A voice note. I pressed play with flour still dusting my fingertips. At first, there was just the rustle of movement, the sound of someone getting into a car. Then Ethan's voice came through, lower, irritated, sharper than I'd ever heard it. "I can't stand that old woman anymore. Once she's gone, we'll live off her money in Paris. Just hold on a little longer, Mel." I froze. The words sank in like ice water down my spine. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe he was joking. Maybe it was about someone else. But then came her voice. "Melanie, my daughter-in-law. She's never going to change. You're wasting your time being nice. Once it's done, we'll be free." And then the sound of a car door slamming shut. The clip ended. I stood there in my kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and butter fading into something bitter. The dough beneath my hands had gone cold and hard. I replayed the voice note once, then twice, then 3 times. Every time I hoped for some different meaning, some shred of misunderstanding. But there was none. They were talking about me, their voices, their plan, their future, built on the idea of my absence. The rest of that afternoon passed like I was underwater. The house felt suddenly too big, too quiet. Even the grandfather clock, ticking steadily by the stairs, seemed to mock me with its calm. I walked into the living room and sat in George's old armchair, the one that still carried his faint scent of cedar and tobacco. He'd been gone 6 years now. The loneliness had softened with time, but this was different. It wasn't loss. It was betrayal. I stared at the framed photo on the mantel. Ethan, maybe 6 years old, grinning in a little blue sweater, his arm wrapped around my neck. I'd worked double shifts to buy him that sweater. The memory hit me like a blow. How does a heart that small grow into something so cold? I tried to call him 3 times, but each call went straight to voicemail. My throat tightened as I heard his recorded message. "Hey, this is Ethan. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you." I hung up before the beep. I didn't even know what I'd say. My mind started spinning, faster than my body could keep up. Had he already done something? Was I safe? What did "once she's gone" even mean? I walked to the kitchen again, staring at the knife block on the counter. My reflection looked pale in the window glass. I'd never been afraid of my son before, but that night I locked every door in the house. As the hours passed, memories came back in fragments. Little things I'd brushed aside over the last few months. Melanie insisting on handling my mail to keep things simple. Ethan suggesting I add him to my bank account in case of emergencies. The way they whispered sometimes when they thought I couldn't hear. I'd chalked it up to care, to love. But love doesn't plot. When I finally went to bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the old fan filling the silence. That voice note replayed in my head over and over like a haunting lullaby I couldn't shut off. "Once she's gone, we'll live off her money in Paris." The words didn't just break my heart. They woke something inside me, something fierce. I turned to the empty side of the bed where George used to sleep and whispered, "If they want a game, I'll give them one." Because that was the moment I knew. The woman they called old wasn't done living yet, and she wasn't going to die quietly. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow felt alive. By morning, I'd played that voice note so many times I could recite it word for word. Can't stand that old woman anymore. Once she's gone, we'll live off her money in Paris. My own son, my Ethan. When the sun rose, I made coffee but couldn't taste it. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the same old mug I'd used for years, the one he'd given me for Mother's Day that said, "World's Best Mom." The words felt like a cruel joke now. The phone buzzed again, a text from Ethan. "Morning, Mom. Hope you're doing okay. Mel and I might swing by later to check on you." I stared at that little blinking bubble on the screen. He didn't know he'd sent me that message. He had no idea I'd heard him plotting my end. Something inside me went cold, but beneath that coldness, something else started to burn. Clarity. Looking back, the signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. It started small, subtle. A few months after George passed, Ethan had offered to help with my finances. I was grateful. Grief made everything foggy. He said he'd organize my bills, handle the online banking. I remember him sitting right at this very table, his laptop open, smiling that reassuring smile. "Mom, this'll just make things easier. You can relax. I'll take care of you." And I'd believed him. Then came the idea of the joint account. He said it was just for emergencies, so if anything ever happens, I can cover your expenses fast. I'd nodded, thinking it was smart. I never thought to ask what joint really meant until it was too late. Over time, I noticed little things. Mail that stopped showing up. A bill I didn't recognize. A piece of jewelry I couldn't find. Melanie once joked that I was getting forgetful. She said it with a laugh, but the look in her eyes wasn't kind. It was testing, like she was taking notes. That morning, I decided to check everything for myself. I grabbed my old binder, the one where I kept all my account statements. Most of them were printed, the way I liked. But when I opened it, there were gaps, missing pages, missing months. Some folders had been switched, and one of my bank accounts, the one I'd opened right after George died, had a new email address listed beside it. Not mine. I called the bank. The woman on the other end sounded concerned. "Mrs. Harris, it seems someone requested online access using a shared verification. Do you have a co-signer named Ethan Harris?" My stomach dropped. "Yes," I said softly. "That's my son." She hesitated. "Well, he's listed as an authorized user now. Would you like me to revoke that?" I paused for a long moment. My hands trembled so hard I had to grip the phone with both. "No," I said finally. "Not yet." I hung up. Because I knew then, I couldn't move without knowing exactly how deep this went. That evening, I sat in my garden with my tea, thinking about George. He'd been the careful one, the planner. Always said, "Lucille, never let love blind you to the fine print." He'd built our lives brick by brick, the house, the savings, the retirement plan. He wanted security for us both. When he passed, Ethan promised to help. But help, it turned out, was a leash. I decided I needed answers, real ones. So I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Martha Delaney. We'd worked together back when I was a secretary at the local law firm. Martha had retired as a paralegal. She'd seen everything, from divorces to embezzlements to family betrayals. When she answered, her voice was raspy but warm. Lucille Harris. Now there's a name I haven't heard in ages. "What's wrong, honey?" I hesitated, then said quietly, "Martha, I think my son's trying to take everything I have." There was a pause. Then, "Meet me tomorrow. Bring everything you've got. We'll find out what's real and what's rotten." That night, I sat at my desk, sorting through the remnants of my life. Bank papers, mortgage files, George's handwritten notes. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Ethan had been moving pieces behind my back for months. My signature copied, my access changed, my independence stolen in small, careful steps. And then a thought struck me like lightning. If Ethan and Melanie had already planned their Paris life, then this wasn't just talk. They were waiting, preparing. Maybe they even thought I wouldn't make it much longer. My eyes drifted to the pill bottles lined up neatly by the nightstand. Heart medicine, blood pressure, sleep aids. A cold chill passed through me. Maybe they were counting on it. I didn't sleep that night either. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was furious. I sat up, reached for my phone, and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in years. My thumb hovered for a moment, then pressed call. When Martha answered, I said only 4 words. "Start the plan, Martha." Because if my own son could betray me for money, then it was time he learned where I really kept it. I met Martha the next morning at a small cafe off Main Street, the same one where we used to grab coffee after work decades ago. She hadn't changed much, still sharp-eyed, still carrying that quiet authority that made lawyers listen even when they didn't want to. She studied me over her cup of black coffee. "You look like a woman who's had the rug pulled out from under her." I managed a brittle smile. "More like the whole floor." I told her everything. The voice note, the bank access, the little manipulations I'd missed. Martha didn't interrupt. She just listened, her expression hardening with each word. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "Well, Lucille, it's clear as day. They're staging a soft takeover. I've seen this before. Family thinks they can move your assets under your nose because you're grieving or getting older." I stared down at my hands, the veins faintly blue against thin skin. "So what do I do?" She smiled, slow and knowing. "You let them think they're winning, but we move everything that matters where they can't touch it." That's when she reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten, the trust George and I created 20 years ago. We'd called it the Harris Legacy Fund. It was meant to protect our assets if anything ever happened, meant to ensure our home, savings, and investments couldn't be taken without my explicit consent. We'd never needed it, until now. Martha explained how it still existed, dormant but alive. All we have to do is move your current assets into that trust, quietly. Once it's done, Ethan and his wife can't touch a dime, no matter what papers they wave in your face. I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. "Can we do it without them knowing?" She grinned. "Oh, Lucille, you'd be amazed how invisible an old lady can be when everyone assumes she's helpless." For the next week, we worked in silence. I pretended to be my usual gentle self on the outside, baking pies, tending to my garden, replying to Ethan's texts with little heart emojis. But behind the scenes, every morning I met Martha at her office, signing papers, transferring titles, securing passwords, and locking everything into the trust. We left behind just enough in my visible accounts to make it seem like nothing had changed. Everything else, the savings, property deeds, even the insurance payouts, was now out of reach. I could almost feel George's presence as I signed the final document. "You did good, Lucille," I imagined him saying in that low, steady voice of his. "You're not done yet." The following weekend, Ethan and Melanie came by for lunch. I'd invited them, actually. I wanted to look them in the eyes. Melanie walked in first, always a little too put together, always sizing up my house like she was appraising a prize. Ethan followed behind her, giving me that fake smile I'd learned to recognize now. "Mom, you look great," he said, kissing my cheek. "And you look busy," I said softly, setting down a tray of lemonade. I noticed how his gaze drifted over the framed photos on the wall, the antique clock, the china cabinet, like he was already cataloging what he'd inherit. Over lunch, they talked about their plans. Paris this, business that, how expensive life was these days. I listened politely, every word tasting like dust. When Melanie excused herself to take a phone call, Ethan leaned in a little closer. "Mom, I've been thinking. You're alone in this big house. Maybe it's time you sold it? You could move somewhere smaller. I could handle the sale for you. Make it easy." I smiled sweetly, as if his words hadn't just twisted the knife in my chest. "You always were good with details, sweetheart." He chuckled, just trying to help. But behind that calm voice, I could hear it, the quiet calculation. After they left, I went upstairs and opened my bedroom drawer. Inside was a small black notebook, the kind George used to keep his fishing logs in. Now it held copies of every document Martha and I had moved, every transfer, every signature. I wrote a single line on the next page. They think they're the wolves, but the shepherd's still watching. 3 nights later, Melanie called. Her tone was syrupy sweet. "Mom, did you get that call from the bank today?" I hesitated. "No, dear. Should I have?" "Oh, it's probably nothing," she said quickly. "Just some updates to your account preferences. Don't worry, we've got it under control." When she hung up, I sat in the dark staring at the phone. Her words weren't concern. They were confirmation. They knew I was checking things. They were watching me. But I didn't panic. Not this time. I smiled. Because I had already moved the pieces. And when people like Melanie think they're in control, that's when they make mistakes. That night, I placed a single call to Martha. "It's done," I said quietly. "Good," she replied. "Then all we have to do now is wait. Let them tighten their own noose." I hung up, walked to the mirror, and stared at the woman looking back. For the first time in years, she didn't look fragile. She looked like someone who'd just woken up from a long, dangerous dream. I smiled faintly and whispered, "They wanted a fool. They're about to meet a fighter." If there's one thing I learned in 70 years of living, it's that people show their true faces when they think you're no longer paying attention. So I decided to give Ethan and Melanie exactly what they wanted, a distracted, harmless old woman. I started small. When Melanie called to ask if I'd received the bank paperwork, I pretended to sound confused. "Paperwork? Oh, I must have misplaced it, dear. My memory's been slipping lately." There was a pause, then a soft, almost triumphant chuckle. "That's okay, Mom. I'll stop by tomorrow and help you find it." Help. That word had become her favorite disguise. The next day, they came over with smiles too sweet to be real. Melanie carried a casserole dish, the kind she always brought when she wanted something. Ethan followed behind with his laptop bag. "We'll just get you organized, Mom," he said, setting up at the dining table. "You know, simplify things for you." I nodded, playing the part perfectly. I even shuffled my steps a little slower than usual, dropped a few papers here and there. Every mistake I made, they swallowed like bait. Inside, though, I was sharp. I recorded every word they said, literally. A small voice recorder sat beneath the lace runner on my table. Martha had given it to me with a wink. "You're building your story, honey. Make sure it has evidence." As days passed, I let them dig their own grave one polite visit at a time. Melanie began stopping by when Ethan was too busy. She'd linger around the kitchen, pretending to tidy up while glancing through my mail. One afternoon, I caught her red-handed. She was opening a letter from my insurance provider when I stepped into the doorway. "Oh, I thought this was junk mail," she said, smiling nervously. "Junk mail in a government envelope?" I asked softly. She blushed, fumbled for an excuse. I just smiled, took the letter back, and said, "Thank you, dear. It's nice to have such curious help." That night, I wrote the date and her words in my notebook. I'd started calling it the Truth Journal. But pretending to be weak comes with its own cost. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit on the edge of my bed and feel the weight of it all pressing down. The silence, the loneliness, the ache of knowing my own son saw me as a burden instead of a blessing. I remembered the days when he'd hold my hand crossing the street, when he'd bring me daisies just because. What happens to a heart when it stops recognizing love? Those thoughts hurt more than any scheme or stolen dollar ever could. Still, I couldn't stop now. A few days later, Melanie accidentally left her phone on my counter. I saw it before she could come back for it. It buzzed once, and the screen lit up with a message. "Ethan. Did she sign it yet? Once that's done, we can start packing." I stared at that text for a long moment, my breath trembling. There it was, their plan in black and white. When she returned minutes later, I handed the phone back with a gentle smile. "You left this, sweetheart." She looked flushed, panicked, almost guilty. "Oh, thank you, Mom. I'm so scatterbrained today." I chuckled softly. We all have our moments. After she left, I sat back down and let the silence fill the house. Then I reached for my own phone, opened my messages and sent a single text to the number Martha had given me. Me. It's time. Phase 2. Over the next few days, I deepened the act. I called Ethan asking silly questions. Now, what was that password again? Did I leave the oven on last night? Each call made him sound more confident, more condescending. Mom, you really shouldn't live alone anymore. Maybe it's time you thought about assisted living. Melanie and I can help with that too. Assisted living. That was their endgame. To move me out and move in. To clear the nest for their Parisian fantasy. So I played along. Maybe you're right, honey. I'm not as sharp as I used to be. Don't worry, Mom, he said kindly. We'll take care of everything. When I hung up, I laughed softly to myself, because for once he was telling the truth. I was taking care of everything. That evening, I pulled out George's old pocket watch, ran my fingers along the worn brass. He'd given it to me on our 25th anniversary, engraved with 5 simple words. Patience is its own revenge. I never truly understood what he meant until now. The next morning, I baked another batch of cinnamon rolls, Ethan's favorite. When they arrived, I offered them tea, smiled like nothing was wrong, and said, I've been thinking about updating my will. Their eyes met for half a second. Hungry, eager. Exactly what I wanted. Oh, Mom, that's smart, Ethan said quickly. We can help with that, too. I nodded slowly, hiding my satisfaction behind a soft smile. Of course you can, dear. You always know what's best. Inside, my heart was steady, cold, unbreakable. They thought they were writing my ending. They didn't realize I'd already written theirs. It's strange how calm you can feel when you finally accept the truth. By the time I set the trap, I wasn't angry anymore. Just focused, coldly, clearly focused. I knew my son and his wife better than they knew themselves. Their greed had a rhythm now, predictable, like the tide. Push, pull, smile, deceive. And soon they'd be swept out to sea by their own current. 3 days after mentioning my will, I got a call from Melanie. Her voice was honey-sweet, dripping with false concern. Mom, Ethan, and I were talking, and we think it's a great idea to update your will, just to make sure everything's handled smoothly. We can bring over the papers the lawyer drafted last time. You'll just need to sign a few things. Her words were wrapped in comfort, but underneath, I heard the hunger. I agreed without hesitation. That sounds lovely, dear. Let's do it over dinner this Sunday. I'll make roast chicken, the one Ethan likes. I could almost hear her grin through the phone. Perfect, we'll bring dessert. When I hung up, I dialed Martha. They're biting, I said simply. Good, she replied. Make sure to sign with your left hand. I laughed softly. Left hand? Lucille, she said, a signature made by the wrong hand isn't valid under law. It looks real enough to fool them, but it won't hold in court. Let them think they've won. We'll be waiting when they try to cash in. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. Sunday came cloaked in sunlight and quiet deceit. I set the table with my best china, the set my mother left me. George's portrait hung above the fireplace, his eyes seeming to watch everything unfold. By 6 o'clock, their car pulled into the driveway. Ethan walked in holding a briefcase. Melanie followed, her smile polished and hollow. Smells amazing, Mom, she said. You shouldn't have gone through all this trouble. Oh, nonsense, I replied cheerfully. It's not every day I get to make things official. That last word made Ethan glance at Melanie. A tiny flicker of excitement crossed his face. He tried to hide it. Failed. Dinner was almost pleasant, if you ignored the undertone of greed that hovered like smoke. Ethan laughed a little too loudly. Melanie complimented my cooking, her eyes darting toward the briefcase on the chair beside her. I played my part flawlessly. Soft voice, gentle hands, the picture of trust. When dessert came, a pie she'd bought, not baked, Melanie finally brought up the real reason they'd come. Mom, before we forget, we brought those papers. It's mostly just confirming beneficiaries, nothing complicated. Ethan chimed in quickly. It's all standard legal stuff, Mom. You'll be fine. I smiled as I dabbed my lips with a napkin. Of course, dear. I trust you both completely. Those words, so easily spoken, felt like loading a gun. They cleared the plates, then opened the briefcase. Ethan laid out the papers across the table, neatly arranged like a vulture spreading its wings. "Right here, Mom," he said, pointing to the last page. "Just sign at the bottom." I took the pen in my left hand, pretending to struggle. "Oh, arthritis is a nuisance," I murmured. "You'll have to forgive my handwriting." Melanie leaned in. "That's fine, Mom. It doesn't have to be perfect." I smiled sweetly, looking into her eyes. "Oh, I know." And then I signed it. Looped, shaky, perfectly invalid. Ethan gathered the papers quickly, his voice bright. "Thank you, Mom. This will make things so much easier when, just in general." Melanie laughed awkwardly, reaching for her purse. "We'll drop this off at the lawyer's first thing Monday." I nodded. "You're such thoughtful children." They left soon after, full of fake hugs and promises to visit more often. As their car disappeared down the street, I walked back into the house and turned on the porch light. Then I sat at the dining table and stared at the empty chair where Ethan had been. My heart ached. Not from fear, not from regret, just from the weight of seeing what love can become when it forgets itself. The next morning, I met Martha at her office. I handed her the pen I'd used. She smiled, flipping through the copies I'd made of every page. "Beautiful work, Lucille. They'll think they've got you, but once they try to file it, it'll crumble like ash." I asked quietly, "And the rest?" She leaned forward, eyes glinting. "We wait. They'll make their move soon. People like them always do. And when they do, we'll have every piece of proof we need." That night, the house felt calm again. The moonlight poured through the curtains like silver silk. For the first time in weeks, I played George's old records and let the music fill the air. Maybe revenge wasn't always loud. Maybe sometimes it was just a well-laid silence, the kind that lets your enemies walk right into it. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to the night, "Let's see what they do next." 8 months. That's how long it's been since I pressed play on that voice note, the one that shattered the illusion of family and forced me to rebuild from the rubble. 8 months since I looked my own son in the eye and realized love can curdle into greed if left unchecked. People ask me sometimes if I regret what I did. The answer is complicated, because justice isn't clean, it's heavy. It costs you pieces of yourself, even when you win. But as I sit here now, with the morning sun warming my porch and my garden humming with life, I know I'd do it all again. The roses are blooming brighter than ever this year. I like to think George would have been proud. He always said the earth knows when you're finally at peace, and it blooms to match your heart. The house is quiet now, not the haunted silence of before. This is a peaceful quiet, the kind that feels earned. Every morning I make my tea the same way. 2 sugars, no milk, old habits, steady and grounding. Some days I still find myself glancing at the doorway, half expecting Ethan to walk in with his boyish grin and say, "Morning, Mom." But that boy's long gone. What's left is a man I don't recognize. Someone who traded love for entitlement. He sent me 1 letter after the court hearing. Apologies, explanations, the word sorry written 7 times in shaky handwriting. I read it once, folded it neatly, placed it in my desk drawer. Not out of forgiveness, but because I needed proof that once upon a time, I raised a man who still knew shame. He didn't go to prison. The judge said he was deeply remorseful and gave him community service instead. Now he spends his days at the same church where I used to volunteer. Martha tells me he mops the floors quietly, barely talks to anyone. I don't take pleasure in it, but I don't feel pity either. Some lessons have to be lived, not told. As for Melanie, she vanished not long after. Rumor says she moved out of state chasing another man, another life. I hope wherever she is, she's learned that money doesn't buy peace. It just pays for a louder kind of emptiness. For a while, I drifted. You'd think victory would taste sweet, but the truth is it's bittersweet. When the adrenaline fades, you're left with silence and the echoes of what used to be. I'd sit in my garden some evenings, the wind chimes swaying softly, and feel both grateful and hollow. The house I'd fought to protect suddenly felt too big, too full of memories. Then, one morning, while tidying up the old bookcase, I found a note tucked inside one of George's fishing journals. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but still legible. Lucille, if life ever turns cruel, don't harden. Just grow around the hurt. That's how trees survive storms. I sat there for a long time, holding that note, tears sliding down my face, and that's when it clicked. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe this was my chance to grow again. A week later, I called Martha. "I have an idea," I told her. She laughed. "Oh Lord, what are you up to now?" "I want to use the trust, not for me, for others. There are people out there like me, Martha. People who don't realize what's happening until it's too late." That's how the Golden Roots Foundation was born. A small charity for seniors who needed legal advice, guidance, or just someone to listen before they signed anything. We opened our doors quietly, with little fanfare. 3 people showed up that first day. A widower whose daughter was pushing him to sell his farm, a retired nurse who'd lost access to her pension after her son changed her email credentials, a woman who just wanted to understand her will before her niece helped her rewrite it. By the end of the month, we were seeing dozens, and as I sat there, watching them find strength in understanding their rights, I realized this was the legacy George wanted all along. Not wealth, not property, but protection, dignity. One afternoon, a young woman came in, early 30s, trembling hands, tear-streaked cheeks. Her brother had been pressuring her to sign away her share of their late father's home. She said, "I don't want to fight him, but I can't let him take everything." I looked her in the eyes and said, "Then don't fight him. Just outsmart him." She blinked, startled. "How?" "By knowing your worth," I said. "Love doesn't mean surrender. Family doesn't mean ownership. And protecting yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival." Her shoulders eased, her breathing steadied. As she left, she whispered, "Thank you." I watched her walk away, sunlight glinting off her hair, and thought, maybe that's why I had to go through all of this, so I could help someone else keep what's theirs before it's taken. That evening, as the day slipped into dusk, I walked through the garden again. The wind carried the scent of rain and new life. The chimes on the porch sang softly, their tune no longer sorrowful. I picked one rose, deep red in full bloom, and carried it inside, placed it beside George's photo. "We made it, old man," I whispered. "We really did." The house felt alive again, not with the sound of betrayal, but with peace. Real, steady peace. I brewed my tea, sat in my armchair, and opened my small black notebook, the Truth Journal. On its last page, I wrote, "Justice doesn't always come from courtrooms. Sometimes it blooms quietly in the heart of a woman who refuses to be erased. I was nearly stolen from my own story. But now, I'm writing the rest of it myself." As I closed the book, the clock ticked softly in the background, steady, reassuring. I looked around the home I'd fought to protect and smiled. I didn't have everything I started with, but what I had now, peace, clarity, purpose, was worth more than all the money in the world. I stepped outside one last time before bed. The moon hung full and bright, bathing the garden in silver light. The roses swayed gently in the wind, strong and unbroken, just like me.